Your episode on internal linking was one of the best received ones we've ever had. You kind of recently did a presentation at the Ahrefs conference, their first one, and it was titled "WTF is Helpful Content."
Yeah, internally, I call it the anti-SEO update because that's truly what I believe it is.
The Google algorithm, what their updates have been about.
What we've done is we've taken the sites that have won every single update, and we compare them to the sites that lose every single update.
What is helpful content? What does it have to do with audience?
What Google wants is to reward the people who have the long-term relationships. They're being sought out again and again and again.
What we would see in the SERPs right now is that Google wants you to trust Forbes and these kinds of brands.
You know, we learned from Google's antitrust trial that they really don't understand the web as much as they pretend to.
How does all that play into this what is helpful content conversation?
These sites are being propped up by domain authority, but it's really the brand that we're interested in.
Dive into how user engagement plays into the concept of helpful content.
What we found is winning sites, the sites that never lost an update, had a crazy number of personal pronouns, something like 22 personal pronouns per page. Brand authority is your get out of jail card that allows you to break every Google sin.
What have you found on over-optimization?
In my presentations, I always use the example of Uncle Harry. Uncle Harry is your helpful content person, doesn't know SEO, he's just an expert in what he does, he just wants to help people. That's who Google wants to reward these days.
Building brands over building links.
The companies I'm working with, I'm telling them, if you have a link building budget, shift that to a brand building budget.
What are some things people can do to check if their content might be over-optimized, even if they aren't thinking it is, and then to de-optimize their content?
I've written about internal links for years. You've had me on the podcast talking about internal links. When we look at the data...
All right, welcome back to the Niche Pursuits podcast. My name is Jared Bauman. Today, we have a returning visitor, Cyrus Shepard with Zippy SEO. Cyrus, welcome back.
Jared, glad to be talking to you again. Thanks for having me.
Your episode on internal linking was one of the best received ones we've ever had, so I'll give you that compliment out of the gate. It was one of my favorite ones as well. A lot has happened in this world since then, and certainly for a lot of people listening, a lot has happened, and you have been fairly vocal about it. I mean, before we get into what we're talking about today, which is kind of your perspectives on this helpful content update and what it's transpired into, tell us who you are. If somebody doesn't know, if somebody didn't listen to that last episode, maybe fill us in who you are, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for reminding me about that internal linking episode. We may have to revisit some of that in our conversation today. So I'm Cyrus Shepard. I've been doing SEO for a long time now. Came up with the company Moz, SEO Moz, worked with Rand Fishkin until that company sold to a public entity. I now run Zippy SEO for the last 3 years, consultancy running out of Oregon, and just having a good time making mischief online.
Yes, you have been. I mean, we featured on our news segment of the podcast quite a bit of your different sharings. Certainly, I'll note being a Google quality rater of sorts, and that's been a fun journey to watch you go on. And I know you bring a lot of different insights to the table, so we'll be looking to get that. You kind of recently did a presentation at the Ahrefs conference, their first one, and it was titled "WTF is Helpful Content." And when you shared that with me, I mean, that was by far, I thought, the most perfect topic for us today, because man, oh man, has that been the question mark surrounding so many content creators over the last couple of years. We just featured a couple of interviews from the Google Web Summit where that question kind of kept coming up, like what is helpful content and Google's response. So, let's kind of wade into it. I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of introduce us to this topic we're going to get into today, but I know it's one that is really important to pretty much everybody listening.
Yeah. So I think we need to put a little bit of blame on the naming department of Google for calling this the helpful content update, because it threw everybody off. In our analysis, it's not really has much to do with how helpful the content is. And I think to understand this, we have to go back to, a couple years ago, 2002, when Google was coming up with this update. And they were getting complaints all the time about how Google results were filled with affiliate spam, unhelpful results about just ad-supported content that had no real expertise. And they were getting complaints about this all the time on sites like Hacker News. And Google's like, shoot, SEOs are getting so good at what they do, they can just fill up our SERPs with whatever they want. And so the helpful content update seems to be a direct response to that. And Google just said, we don't want any of this stuff anymore. We want to de-incentivize the creation of this type of affiliate and ad-supported content, and we're going to just completely shift towards other signals. And now we're dealing with the aftermath of that.
Yeah, we were joking. I think it was with Morgan, the interview with Morgan from the Web Summit, about how much of it was the name, and the triggering effect it has for content creators versus just the abrupt changes, which is more on the algorithmic side and penalizing content that people spend a lot of time on.
Yeah, internally, I call it the anti-SEO update, because that's truly what I believe it is, that Google wanted to correct the advantage that publishers could have by leveraging traditional SEO techniques, including the internal linking that we talked about and all those things, and focus on more real, I hate to use the word real world, but outside the web signals to start ranking websites.
Hey everyone, Spencer here, founder of the Niche Pursuits podcast. Last year, the traffic to nichepursuits.com more than tripled, with most of those gains coming from Google. In fact, I finally hit the 1 million page views per month milestone. In order to achieve this growth, my team and I publish over 100 articles a month. The final step for each of those articles? We build at least one new internal link to that article using Link Whisper. This helps index it faster and helps it rank better in Google. This also helps us avoid having any orphaned posts in the future. If you want to give your new articles the best chance possible, you need to build a process around internal linking when you publish. It only takes a few seconds with Link Whisper to get suggestions and check the box next to the internal links you want. They are all built automatically once you've made your selections. No need to go into each article, find a relevant sentence, highlight the anchor text, and add the internal link. Link Whisper does all this automatically once you've made your selection. If you want to try out Link Whisper, just head over to linkwhisper.com and use coupon code podcast at checkout in order to get $15 off.
I mean, you're pretty heavily involved in SEO. You're also you were heavily involved on how Google wants website content to be ranked from the quality rater guidelines and how they asked you to score it. You kind of have seen both sides of it. Maybe you can talk through what an algorithm looks like these days, like the Google algorithm, what their updates have been about. You mentioned 2022, but maybe starting around then and forward.
Yeah, so right before they introduced the helpful content update, or right around the same time, there were several changes to the quality rater guidelines, and that's around the time I started working as a quality rater, because I wanted to understand how Google was, trying to evaluate sites. And they added this thing called experience to EEAT. So experience, expertise, authority, trust. And as a quality rater, they started asking us to evaluate sites on how much experience a site showed with their topic. So it wasn't just enough to cover the topic completely. It wasn't just enough to answer the questions completely. Sites had to show experience. So now we're researching about pages. We're researching creator profiles. We're seeing if they're actually including pictures of themselves. If it's a travel blog, are they actually in the place that they say they are? If it's a product review, does it look like they actually bought it and, are unpacking with their unpacking videos and things like that? If they're a doctor, are they board certified? All these experience signals. And people say, well, Google can't tell if you're experienced or not. Well, that's fair enough. Maybe they can't. But what they can do is take these, the quality raters are generating tens of thousands of scores every day. And Google can just take that and feed it into their machine learning algorithms and come up with something that's an approximation. And that's how they scale this, these sort of experience signals throughout the web. And we've seen some evidence that that's actually what happened.
If Google, because that's long been said before, Google can't tell how experienced you are, or I also which experiences are better, and how do they put a rate? What have you seen in the way that the algorithms have transpired as experience has entered into? I mean, you say that it's fed their machine learning. We know machine learning is a massive part of how their algorithms work. Do you have any examples of how that could play itself out in today's algorithm?
Yeah, and I got to be careful when I frame this, because people sometimes jump to conclusions and say, these are ranking factors. I am not claiming anything as a ranking factor. These are just patterns that we see among winning and losing sites. And what we've done is we've taken the sites that have won every single update, sites that have never lost, and we compare them to the sites that lose every single update. And then we look for differences in the data. And when we do that, one of the things we found was the use of stock images. Lots of sites use stock images or non-original images, especially if you're doing product reviews. You'll use the manufacturer's image. And that's fine. But what we found is sites that do that consistently tend to have steeper declines than sites that were using their original product images or their original travel images with lots of people in them, for instance. Images with people do really, really well these days as opposed to not. And I'm not saying that's a ranking factor, but that seems to be a general pattern of sites that we see rewarded versus sites that we've seen decline. So I'm not saying stock images is a ranking factor. It's just something we see over and over again in the data.
Yeah, and to your point, like it's not always, when you're looking at the symptom, that's not always the problem, right? Like maybe a stock image is actually underscoring other issues that Google's trying to address with that, which is, like you said, maybe not actually having the product in your hands, which plays itself out in a lot of variety of areas.
Yeah.
Okay, so in your presentation, I looked through the slide deck, and you talked a lot about audience. You mentioned audience targeting one time. You mentioned audience intent one time. You even talked about long-term and short-term audience goals. Like, I don't know how related all these things are, but I circled audience because I wanted you to talk about audience as it relates to this helpful content update. What is helpful content? What does it have to do with audience?
Yeah. So originally, when Google released this, it seemed like they were targeting affiliate and ad-supported sites. We just can't deny that in the data. I think they went a little too far, but they talk about, do you have an existing or intended audience? And it took us a long time to figure out sort of what that means. But Google seems to be rewarding sites that are establishing long-term client relationships. Are you coming back? Are you searching for the site again and again? Are you buying things from the site? Or are you purely an informational site where you want to monetize clicks? It's a click and done. Click and done. Your audience comes solely from ranking and search results. What Google wants is to reward the people who have the long-term relationships. They're being sought out again and again and again versus the short-term relationship, click and monetize, because there's two distinct groups there. One's receiving less traffic today and the other is receiving more traffic.
We featured an article recently in the news podcast episode. It sounds like a Verge article, but I don't think it was The Verge. But it was somebody basically saying, I think it was one of these publishers who's gotten hit repeatedly and multiple times. They're like, you don't have a go-to toaster review person, right? Like when you need a toaster, do you need to have someone who's trying to be the toaster guy? Do you need this audience type of approach when, going back to what the user wants, they seem to just need an honest, in-depth appraisal that's been tested. And they were arguing that perhaps, how do sites like that exist in this day and age? And maybe that would be the question I'd throw at you. Like, has Google put the can on these types of sites, even though, to your point, like what they want is long-term audience engagement?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love the idea of the toaster guy because instantly I'm seeing this branded thing. So it seems like anymore, just having this guy or woman who reviews toasters and is the best in the world about it, that doesn't seem to be enough anymore. But there's some room there because if you're actually a brand, if you're the toaster guy and you've got a TikTok channel, with 100 million subscribers, I think there are people, who do Excel functions that, meet this criteria. And you're on YouTube and you have some actual branding as the toaster guy and people are actually searching for that person is still going to be doing okay. But if you don't have that brand anymore, it's going to be harder for you. So yeah, I love the toaster guy brand though.
It is a dichotomy that I thought was a really good example because, again, I this was a couple months ago, so I don't want to misrepresent whatever the article was. But it's kind of like nobody gets out of bed in the morning to be like the toaster guy, right? But that still doesn't take away the fact that when someone wants to buy a toaster and they don't want to have to do all the research themselves, they've got to go somewhere. What we would see in the SERPs right now is that Google wants you to trust Forbes and these kinds of brands or Reddit and social media. Right. Yeah. And they've kind of pushed out. Is that an accurate assessment? And what do you see in the data when it comes to like audiences? Is that who audiences really want? They want TikTok, Reddit, and Forbes to tell them what toaster to buy?
No, but I don't want to sound like I'm apologizing for Google, but let's look at it from Google's point of view and the dilemma that they're facing. We learned from Google's antitrust trial that they really don't understand the web as much as they pretend to. They don't understand documents. And with AI, with all the tools that we use to optimize content, whether it's Surfer or Market Views or whatever, it's very easy for anybody to create content that looks like an expert piece of content. And Google has a very hard time distinguishing expert content from made-up content. And we think that they have these magic tools to do it, but they don't. They really have poor tools and levers to pull. So they're relying on brand and these other signals. They're getting better at it. I'm going to give them credit. The last few updates, they got a tiny bit better at it. But, the Eric Schmidt quote from 10, 15 years ago, brand is how you sort through the cesspile. They've leaned heavily into brand with the Forbes and the Reddit because they don't have the tools to distinguish. And the problem is a lot of the great content is getting filtered out because of that. And that's unfortunate. We're losing a whole generation of creators because Google can't distinguish good content from bad.
So brand, which is kind of speaking to the Forbes example, I'll park Reddit for a little while. Maybe we'll have time to come back to it. It's not really on our agenda, but I still am dying to talk to you about it. We'll park that for now. So brand, so the Forbeses of the world and other brands. To be fair, Forbes is kind of the one that gets referenced in this community all the time. But let's talk about brand. I know you mentioned that really great Moz study by Tom Capper on domain authority, brand reputation. That was, I think, the concept that he really kind of dove deep into. How does all that play into this what is helpful content conversation?
Yeah. Great study by Tom. I think I just got back from a speaking circuit, and I think Tom's study was the most referenced piece of content on that circuit. And what Tom did was look at a site's brand authority. And brand authority is basically simply a metric about how many people are searching for you. If you're the toaster man, how many people are searching toaster man in Google search results or, related? How many people are searching for wire cutter or things like that, specifically searching for you? So they have this score at Moz, and you can look it up. It's free. Just log in and enter your domain. You can find your own brand authority score. What Tom did is he compared it to domain authority, how many links the site has, because traditionally links have been our North Star metric. We build links. We try to build up our domain authority. And what Tom found is it didn't really matter, how high your brand authority was or your domain authority, but when those were out of sync, when your links were way higher than your brand, those were the sites that got hit by Google's helpful content update. And if you think about it for a second, what kind of sites do that? Well, it's sites that have a lot of SEO. It's sites that built up and either built links or bought links or created a bunch of links, but no one's really looking for them. They don't have a lot of brand authority. So those were the sites that hit. And it's almost going back to the whole anti-SEO thing. These sites are being propped up by domain authority, but it's really the brand that we're interested in. And so now it's almost switched. Brand is becoming a more important signal than domain authority in a lot of ways.
What are the specific metrics that Tom used or that Moz uses to calculate the brand authority side of things?
I don't have insight into exactly that, but what I think I can say this, and maybe Tom can write in and correct me, but I think it's basically looking at how many branded terms your site ranks for and very well for. So if you're Moz, they're going to rank for things like Link Explorer or Moz.com or Moz or Moz metrics. Anything that you rank number 1 or 2 for that could be considered a branded keyword. And they probably have some logic for figuring out what those branded keywords are. But
Yeah, only reason I asked, a lot of people talk about is it direct traffic that signals that a brand is an authority because people are going directly to your site, i.e. they bookmarked it or it's a favorite, but that kind of be part and parcel with the same kind of thing.
Yeah, and for the record, we actually looked at that when the original helpful content came out. And I'm not saying it's not a factor, but we could find no correlation between third-party traffic, social media traffic, any of those, and regarding if a site got hit or not. So,
okay. You also talked about you touched on experience, but you also talked about it as it relates to user engagement. And I know I reference your study a lot where you looked at some of the correlating factors that led to sites dropping. I believe I really should get this right. I think 4 out of your top 5 were UI related, like ad related, ad density related, that sort of thing. I think 3 or 4 out of the top 5. So when I think of your topic of user engagement, when I think of the things you've had to talk about, I do think about that correlation study you did. But dive into how user engagement plays into the concept of helpful content.
Yeah. So when the helpful content update first hit, we started doing all these correlations between winning sites and losing sites. And the first things we looked at were what I was learning as a quality rater. What we talked about, the E for experience, does that come into play? So Google gives us some instructions, but they don't tell us exactly how to do it. So I thought, well, the way I determine if a site has experience is I look if they talk about themselves. Are they talking about what they did, or are they just writing an encyclopedia article that anybody could write by researching the internet? So we started crawling the sites, thousands of pages, and extracting first-person pronouns. I did this. Our team went here. We like to, things like that. And what we found is winning sites, the sites that never lost an update, had a crazy number of personal pronouns, something like 22 personal pronouns per page. They're just talking about themselves all the time. Losing sites still use personal pronouns, but is more like 9 times per page. So there's a huge difference in that experience level. Now, again, I'm not saying personal pronouns are a ranking factor. It's just a pattern we see amongst winning sites and losing sites. Winning sites talk about themselves a lot more. They generally have pictures of themselves a lot more, actually interacting with product. And I don't think it's a stretch to believe that Google's machine learning algorithms can start to identify some of these signals and just pattern match sites. Put this in one bucket, put this in the other bucket. And sites that aren't talking about themselves, aren't sharing personal experience, tend to do a little bit worse after these updates.
Yeah. Okay. That's fascinating.
I should talk about ads too.
Well, I was going to do my next question. I'm like, we still have to touch on that thing about ads.
And every time I talk about this, I get torched on Twitter or any social media program because no one likes to say ads are a problem. And I'm not saying ads are a problem, but in the Quality Rater guidelines, at the same time that Google added experience, they also added new guidelines around ads, specifically ads that cover the content when you scroll. So when you're on your mobile device, and I think Newsweek is a big site for this. Every site on Newsweek is horrible because you go on Newsweek and there's ads, video ads that autoplay. You can barely see the content. A lot of recipe sites do this. You can barely see the content. As quality raters, we were instructed to score these sites lower. So we went through our database of sites and started, cataloging. Does the site on mobile have ads that cover the content? Huge correlation. The sites that won every update, only like 20% had these kind of ads at the bottom. Losing sites, it was over 50%, and it was very highly correlated. I'm not saying ads are a problem. But I have seen success with some clients that have removed especially on mobile, the scrolling ads at the bottom. And people don't like to hear this because they say, hey, why does Newsweek get away with it?
Yep.
Why does Forbes get away? There's lots of sites with terrible ads all over the internet. Well, we need to go back to that brand authority conversation. Yep. We are dealing with an internet with 2 sets of rules. If you have that higher brand authority, you can get away with a lot of stuff. And you can't point to other sites and say, why do they get it? It all goes back to brand authority. Brand authority is your get out of jail card that allows you to break every Google sin and get away with it. So it sucks, but that's the world we're living in.
Brand authority equals anti-SEO in Google's minds.
Yeah, to an extent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sticking with this idea of SEO and this idea of optimizing for search, it's been talked about that over-optimized content did not perform well historically in this helpful content update. A lot of people are saying that they're actually like ditching content optimization and actually trying to write anti-SEO, to borrow your term, like trying to not have headers that are optimized, trying to not use any sort of keywords, actually like literally write it in a way that's not optimized. I mean, what have you found on over-optimization? But again, I want to draw a line between over-optimization and just optimization and ask if there's any differences there as well.
This is such a tough question to answer because it's almost like we live in a weird universe where optimization still works and you still have to optimize. And, internal links is a perfect example. You need internal links to help your SEO, but it's almost like if you match these other criteria, you're ad supported, you have low brand authority, then the rules flip. Then the internal links don't help you so much. The optimized title tags don't help you so much. I'm working with a client right now, and there's a couple of phenomena I'm seeing with this client that I think we generally see. Sites that tried to rank for everything generally didn't do well after these updates. So if you're a travel site and you're writing for every location around the globe, Mexico, Europe, blah, blah, those sites tended to do worse than the sites that were just writing about one location. Mexico City Unlimited, and they have, just a small niche site that has 200 pages specifically about Mexico City. They did great after the update. Similarly, we see that at the page level as well, that pages that try to cover every conceivable point about a topic, the way that we were taught to optimize for pages, you go into, go make sure you have topical authority for these whole things. They didn't do as well after this update compared to pages that are very focused and answer specific. Get your answer, get in, get out, without the 20 subheadings. So again, it's almost like an anti-SEO pattern. The opposite is that sites that are deemed more helpful, very specific, give the answer at the top of the page, they're still doing great, and we don't have to worry about the SEO as much. It's more just like, I'm a real person. In my presentations, I always use the example of Uncle Harry. Uncle Harry is your helpful content person, doesn't know SEO. He's just an expert in what he does. He just wants to help people. He doesn't understand title tags. He doesn't understand internal linking. He doesn't understand anything about SEO. That's who Google wants to reward these days. Just the creators that are honestly, genuinely just have some expertise to share. They don't want to rank me. They don't want to rank Matt Diggity or Jared. Because we're the SEO, we're the ones who ruin search in their eyes. So be more like Uncle Harry and be less like the SEO expert that you follow on Twitter.
So the plumber writing about plumbing content. Okay. Well, this begs a few questions that are related to your presentation, but might go a little tangential. But we've heard Danny Sullivan talk quite a bit over the last year and a half or 2 years about user-first content. Yeah. I heard you talk about the user there a couple of times, so I thought it'd be a good time to ask, can you help us, from your research, define what user-first content really is? And again, talking to a bunch of content creators who are recovering SEOs, and I say that tongue-in-cheek, meaning going back to this over-optimization topic that you talked about, people trying to make their content as best as they can for today's environment. We're told to write user-first content, but oftentimes have a lot of question marks about what that looks like. Yeah.
And before I answer that, I want to give Danny Sullivan some credit. I know he gets a lot of hate, to be honest, on social media, but I think he's been trying to tell us for a couple of years now what's really going on. And if you look at his statements, him and John Mueller have been very consistent about stop doing things for SEO. Stop doing things for SEO. And those guys can't come out and say, hey, these updates target SEO practices, but they are telling us stop doing things for SEO. And I think they were secretly telling us what these updates were about. These are anti-SEO updates. So creating things for users and being user-centric, I think these are sometimes hard to define, but for creators like us and creators like the people in your audience that aren't big brands, I think it's about being genuinely human. One of the things I'm telling a client right now is that he's in the law space, and one of the things I'm telling him is the best thing you can do right now is go hire a photographer. Go hire a photographer, get a bunch of pictures of yourself and plaster pictures of you all over the website so that your readers understand that you're dealing with a real person. Mm-hmm. And I think that can translate over to Google's algorithm in a weird sort of machine learning sort of sense. Talk about you. Don't just write these encyclopedic articles that we've been writing for 20 years. Talk about your own cases. Talk about how you worked with clients to help them. Put case studies on your site. Make it personal because Google, like I said, Google can't tell the difference between AI crap and authentic content. So they want to reward people. They want to reward creators. They have enough content. They have content to rank the SERPs for the next 20 years. What they don't have is people and genuine experiences. And so that's where I think we have to shift our thinking a little bit and be more genuine in our content creation.
Hey there, thanks so much for listening to the Niche Pursuits podcast. Did you know that Jared and I are members of a private group called the Niche Pursuits Community? And today I want to share with you how you can join for just $1. The Niche Pursuits Community is a private members area for niche online publishers to mastermind and grow their businesses together. We hold weekly calls live with experts where you can ask questions. These experts share tips on Amazon Influencer, Google Discover, building email newsletters, getting traffic from Facebook, and other strategies to grow your online business. You'll also be assigned a mastermind group of 4 or 5 other people in a similar stage in business as you. Dive deep into your business issues and get your problems solved. If you use coupon code PODCAST at checkout, you'll get your first month for just $1. Go ahead and give it a try. Come join me, Jared, and lots of other digital entrepreneurs inside my private group at community.nichepursuits.com. And be sure to use coupon code PODCAST. I'll see you on the inside.
So you're not going to love this next question, but I can just see people typing it right now into the YouTube as I'm interviewing you. So I got to ask it. And that is, because again, I hear these stories every week over email or on the comments of our podcast. And that is the person who says, yeah, Cyrus, but I have a YouTube channel that people love and they comment on it. They like it. My users like my content. I get thousands and tens of thousands of clicks and saves and engagement per day on my pins that I pin. I am creating user-centric content, and I know that. How does the algorithm respond to that type of situation?
Yeah, that's tough. And I think to be fair, I think Google is very imperfect at this. Google is trying a bunch of different hammers and sledges to get this content. And I've said many times on social media, I think they've overcorrected. So you see sites with great Pinterest pages, great YouTube channels, and it just doesn't translate to the web page and the websites. I will say most of the time when I go to these websites, I see these great experiences, but there's one telltale sign that I usually see, and that's generally over-optimization. So they may have great experiences, but I see super optimized title tags. I see internal linking gone crazy. A lot of these things that we've correlated with lower ranking. So oftentimes, one of the first things we have to do here when we work with clients is pull back on some of those SEO signals. Just scale things back. We remove internal links. We de-optimize our title tags. We make sure that we're not using stock images, things like that, and we scale all those things back. Topical focus is a big one. We might have to get rid of certain site sections to make sure our site is more focused on a certain topic. But yeah, it's imperfect, totally imperfect. Google's not ready for you, but maybe the only strategy we've come up with is scaling back some of those SEO signals so that we're not so much in Google's crosshairs.
Got it. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Maybe you're a bit ahead of your times in terms of where the algorithm is trying to reward. They almost are trying to get rid of the chaff before they actually catch up with what's with what users like. They're just getting rid of the stuff they know users don't like, maybe, and there's a lot caught up in the middle of that.
Yep. Yeah, it's heartbreaking when people create these YouTube videos and they put so much work into authentic product reviews or their travel or everything, and it's just Google doesn't recognize it because Google's not that great. So I think this goes back to the argument for SEO. Google doesn't want people to have to get SEO audits, and I understand that, but at the same time, Google is so imperfect, we have to massage our content to fit what they're ranking and work with their imperfections. So I think SEO's job, the good ones, are safe for a bit at least.
Circling back to a thread that's gotten pulled so many times, and maybe moving into a little bit the second half of this interview into some of your advice or your guidance or just your thoughts on it. You can even cage it as this isn't what I'm telling you to do, but this is just Cyrus's musings on after looking at all the data. But moving into like a more tactical approach, like building brands over building links, building a recognizable brand as a shift in terms of building domain authority or that sort of thing. So maybe let's maybe put some ideas out on the page for people who are listening. You're like, I am in the mindset historically for the last 5 or 10 years with my brand about making sure I focus on domain authority. What are some things they can focus on that help with brand authority?
Yeah, I'm guilty of this too. When I started to make these realizations, I looked at my own brand authority for Zippy, and I have some, but it's not great compared to the links. I've always been a link guy. And a perfect example is I have a newsletter called the SEO Tips Newsletter. I thought I was a genius getting keywords in my newsletter title. But is it, that's great. But unless I'm ranking number 1 for SEO tips on that and people start associating, if that's my brand, it doesn't do me as much. I should have called it the Zippy SEO newsletter or the Cyrus Shepard SEO newsletter. Anything to get just 1 or 2 people a month searching for that and clicking on my website so Google can start associating that with me. And I tell people, you don't have to be a big brand. Just start by being a little brand. Just any brand traction you can get. And the companies I'm working with, I'm telling them, if you have a link building budget, shift that to a brand building budget. Shift it to digital PR, not talking about your content, best refrigerators, talk about your company. Go on podcasts like this and talk about your company founders, what you do, get those mentions and links about you, the person, the creators, and not so much about your content. But it's tough. It's tough to get people to look for you. Those multi-channel options, whether Pinterest, YouTube, you got to make sure those are branded as well. If you're the toaster guy, you got to make sure you're using the toaster guy everywhere you talk about it, not using generic keywords. It's tough. I'm still thinking through a lot of these things. How do we build brand in this area where brand is so important? And I don't think I'm there yet, if I'm being honest with you. I'm not sure I have the answers to all these strategies, but hopefully we can, as an industry, start to figure them out.
Not to get too nerdy, but sticking with this current rabbit hole of choice, how does this differ, or is this the same as what historically maybe has been referred as entity stacking?
Yeah, I think there's an element to that, and I'm not sure how, because there's a little bit of a difference between brand, people searching for you, and mentions on the internet.
Correct.
And maybe they're related, but maybe not, and maybe it doesn't matter. I have to believe that if we build those entity relationships online, getting people talking about us and associating those things, I have to believe that it is still beneficial, even if it's not directly related to brand search or people seeking you out.
Right. Yeah. Creating a good positive entity stack still does not drive users to search for you and come back to your website, but it's got to help. It's got to help.
Right. You run this podcast. I don't know how many people, say to me, I heard you on the podcast. And then, so I reached out. Those people had to be Googling me to do that. And every guest that is on your show probably benefits from not only the entity relationships, but the brand search, no matter the volume, that results as a part of it. So there's got to be a helpful correlation there.
I mean, historically, social media has been a big contributor to brand, right? And obviously, a lot of people are leaning into social media more now simply because they need the traffic. They need to pursue other avenues for traffic. At the same time, you talked about how there was no correlation between social media traffic, having a big social media brand, and not getting hit. How do people view social media going forward from this kind of lens?
And just to clarify, our data found no correlation in getting hit by helpful content updates. There is still a correlation between overall traffic and third-party referrals, social media, all that. I'm sorry, I forgot the question, Jared.
Well, it's a fair point. Like, how should people look at social media when it comes to overall brand going forward? Maybe it's not a direct indicator for helpful content in Google's eyes now, but what does the role of social media look like for a content creator going forward?
I think it's increasingly important, especially since Google is always hard to rely on. I remember back when I started SEO, we used to say diversify your traffic sources. That aim for 30% search engine traffic, and I think that's true today. When I look at the traffic profiles of very healthy sites, it's generally only about 30% Google traffic, which is probably a little higher because of untracked traffic. But one thing that I think is important to mention is I work with a lot of creators, and they are uncomfortable with this new reality. I work with this travel site that produces some of the best content out there, but they don't want to talk about themselves. They don't want to put pictures of themselves. They don't want to talk about their experience. They want to focus it on the users. And so many users, so many creators are like that. If you're the toaster guy, you don't want to talk about yourself. You want to talk about the damn toaster. And so it's uncomfortable for people. But I would argue if you're in that position where people aren't searching for you because they don't know who the toaster guy is, you got to start twisting those levers and putting yourself on social media, not just your content, because people don't care about toasters so much on content, but the toaster guy doing something cool, pouring plasma down their toaster, that's a cool thing, Hey, it's the toaster guy. That you want people to be excited about you. If you can get people excited about you and start associating you, your creators, with your brand, that's probably a more defensible position going forward.
I love this analogy of the toaster guy that we've run with, and
Yeah.
I feel like a year or two is going to go by, and we are going to have the toaster guy, very much perhaps because of this interview here. This is awesome. So let's talk. I've heard, I think it was you mentioned it. I've heard it. I'll give you the credit, but I've heard it mentioned about a couple different things. I think it was you as it relates to Google quality raters, quality rater guidelines, and it's how much effort did the content take to produce?
Yeah,
and it feels like, I'm just gonna be honest. It feels like such a dumb metric. It feels like showing your work at school. I was a math major, basically, and I remember, sometimes I would just know the answer, and I would have to show my work because that's what the teacher demanded. And it was so annoying, and it feels kind of like showing your work. But you talked about it, and it's been talked about, that Google actually is potentially paying attention to how much effort has gone into the content.
Yeah. And to be clear, when I talk about quality raters, I don't want to overblow their influence. These machine learning algorithms that Google uses with quality raters are just a small part of the overall algorithm, but they can have an impact. So as a quality rater, one of your scoring criteria is effort. How much effort and care did the creators put into this website? And it's a loosey-goosey metric. It goes into the overall score of, high quality to low quality, but it does play in. So you're looking at, have they updated the site in the last 10 years? Are they using custom imagery? Are they just slapping something together? Is this a programmatic page that no one looked at? Has it been updated in a while? Things like that. So all these things go into the scoring, gets fed into the algorithm. And of course, Google doesn't know how much effort you put into the page. But if you can look like a page that is well designed, is well loved, has been updated in the last few years, great content, that can help down the line.
So in that vein, respond to the listener right now who's saying to themselves, wait a second, I thought they said, don't worry about getting a technical SEO on it. Those are not important. Versus now I need to make sure that I look the part. My website is pretty. I see the effort. There aren't any errors and problems. Like some of the things that go along with high effort, unique content seem to also go up against some of the things that they've been told not to worry about.
Yeah, I for these questions, I just like to step back and put yourself in the shoes of a quality rater. Look up your top query in Google Search Console, and then Google it on your mobile phone. You got to use your mobile phone. Quality raters only use mobile phones. Google crawls your website on mobile, and just look at you versus your competitors and ask yourself, how quickly am I getting the answer to my question? What do my competitors have that I don't in terms of design and user experience? And just what do I think people want? What would my grandma want from searching this site? Stop thinking like Google, keywords, optimization. Think like your grandma and go from there. And that experience is probably worth 2 SEO audits if you can really nail the grandma experience.
Good answer. Love that answer. It's I have so many stories I could tell about that, but we'll keep it going. That's a great answer. So maybe let me hit you with a couple of things that we've talked about in the interview, and maybe we can transfer into or transition into you giving some practical advice for people who have, kind of had their websites and their content hit by one or subsequent updates here. We've talked about over-optimization. We've talked about optimizing. What are some practical steps? You kind of already did share some of it when you talked about some of the first things you do when you onboard a client, but maybe let's put a fine point back on it. What are some things people can do to check if their content might be over-optimized, even if they aren't thinking it is, and then to de-optimize their content?
Yeah, so some of the work we do with clients is we look at their internal links for one, which I kind of take personal offense to, because I've written about internal links for years. You've had me on the podcast talking about internal links. When we look at the data, we see that sites that get hit consistently have great internal links. It's almost like Google is targeting that. So something
Good
we do
experiences with the internal links. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially anchor text diversity, which is something I've advocated for years. So a lot of my clients have success. Not all of them. These are oftentimes hit and miss. A lot of my clients have success by removing internal links. And some of them are going through page by page, hundreds, thousands of pages, removing very optimized internal anchor text. It's a very tedious process, but that's one of the things they're doing. Title tags is another. We found in our data that we do similarity matching between the title tag and the page headline, your H1 versus your title. And we found that sites that tend to win the updates have very similar title tags and H1s. They're not optimizing their title, because that's something we do as SEOs. We're like, 10 best toasters, 10. Then in the title, we write 10 amazing toasters for 2024. So, and I don't have firm data on how well this works, but we're encouraging clients, write your headline, just stick that in the title going forward. And we're seeing some early success with that. Things like reducing the amount of schema. We found that winning sites had schema, but losing sites had tons of schema, like pages and pages, hundreds and hundreds of lines. I'm not saying schema is a negative ranking factor, but we work with clients who are like, what's triggering a featured snippet or rich result in this schema? Let's keep that stuff. Let's lose all these hundreds and hundreds of lines of the other stuff. So just things like that, things that we're doing for SEO that Danny Sullivan, John Mueller are talking about. We're trying to scale those things back with the SEO.
Okay. Sticking in the practicals, staying here with really practical advice. Again, you have touched on it already throughout the podcast. So I'll try to bring it back here for us. User experience. What are some things people can do? Start with a mobile device. Only use a mobile device to analyze. That was a big thing you said. What are some other tips you can share with people about improving their user experience, or at least even just being able to identify a bad user experience on their website?
So a couple things that we look at is how, on your mobile device, how long does it take to get the answer? If you're Mr. Toaster and you're talking about the best toaster of 2024, do I have to scroll to find your best toaster? Or can I find the answer right away without going back and doing another Google search? So we try to answer the questions as soon as possible. A couple weird things happen when you do that. You'll often see your bounce rate increase and your time on site decrease. So it almost looks like you have worse user engagement metrics.
I was going to bring that up.
Leave that in for a couple months. We see the worsening user engagement, but we see increased rankings. And we're pretty sure it's because people are not going back to search Google for the correct answer. So
they got it.
Answering things question. But going back to the personal experience thing that we were talking about, I tell my clients, stop writing encyclopedia articles and start writing personal experiences. Share experiences over facts. So the bad example are the recipe sites that, have 1,000 pages of my grandma used to make this recipe for me. But you need to bring a little bit of that in now. You need to talk about why you are an expert in the subject, how you tested, show your methodology, all those things. It's not a guarantee, but it's kind of like a minimal requirement for ranking going forward.
Something that's come out of several now interviews with people who are at Google's Web Summit just in, I think that was late October, where they brought in 20 publishers or so that were really had suffered dramatic losses from the helpful content update. And Google kind of had vetted these 20 publishers and kind of said, hey, these are guys who are creating good content. We've individually vetted them. They brought them in a room. They had some conversations, right? And something that's come out of that is this concept. It's not the first place, by the way, of a site-wide classifier. The helpful content update was, in essence, a site-wide classifier. Now, that was in their documentation at the beginning. It's got squirrely since then. What are your thoughts on that, again, as it relates to people who are now having to create content in this new world of helpful content?
Yeah. The idea of a site-wide classifier is highly contentious. Even my own clients like to argue with me about it. And the Googlers at that Creator Summit said, no, there is no site-wide classifier. And I think I joked on Twitter, we don't have a site-wide classifier. We have a page-level penalty applied to every URL that shares the same domain. So, and I think there actually might be, not to get geeky, but there actually might be some truth to that, because when we see these penalties hit, we do not see sharp drop-offs.
Right.
We see declines that are very gradual.
Almost like it catches up with itself as it begets itself, and it begets itself and begets itself.
Yeah. And I think what's happening is at the page level, these page level signals are propagating throughout the site through internal links. And that's why we see these gradual declines. And that's the telltale sign to me that it's a site-wide helpful content sort of issue. Because when you get hit by a regular update, it's steep or steep up. And these site-wide classifiers tend to follow gradual declines.
They do. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Hey, let's just quickly touch on it. So much of what helpful content as it relates to these updates has been about is the classic, like kind of informational content, affiliate style content. I mean, if you're in local business, you probably haven't even noticed what the helpful content update happened. If you're in e-com, you haven't even noticed that there's been a helpful content update. You're like, what's going on out here? Why is that? And is there a truth to it being segmented to certain types of content, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. When the original helpful content hit, it was 99% content sites or informational sites, niche sites, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
When Google rolled the helpful content update into Core last March, the big March Core update, I started having different types of clients reach out to me. And it expanded to the local clients, software companies. It kind of expanded to everybody. So those type of companies are more immune, but they're not completely immune. The same sorts of signals apply. So these are companies that have high amount of domain authority or links and a lower amount of brand authority. So even though they're selling real services or software, or they have a local presence, anytime you get that big disparity, we're seeing them susceptible to these actions. But to your point, they're not going out of business. They're not dying. We just see them fall to the level of their brand search to a certain extent. A lot of clients ask me, can I just start selling a product? Can I? And we see that. My answer is, you can, but you really got to go all in. You can't just do some digital downloads and hope that that's going to help you. You have to become a digital download company that's known for that. You can't just slap a shopping cart. Is one of the things that came out of the Google leak is Google has a classifier to determine if a page sells something or is commercial. And so I think it's fair to say Google has many ways to tell if you're faking it or if this is really the focus of your site. So yeah, you can change your business model, but you really got to go all in because Google's smarter than that.
I mean, going forward, as we kind of wrap up here, as we come to a close, like going forward, what are your thoughts on how this is going to shape the future of how content gets created? We haven't talked about AI. And by the way, if I brought up AI, I feel like we would have been here for a couple hours. I would have enjoyed it, by the way. But we try to keep these things to 45 minutes to an hour. But we haven't talked about AI, its role. We haven't talked about its helpful content updates role as it related to when AI came out and what was on the forefront. But trying not to get too deep into those weeds, we talk about what does helpful content look like going forward from this, from your research, from your studies, from your knowledge, from what you've seen as a Google quality rater, everything you're bringing to the table. Like, what are your thoughts on the future of helpful content in SEO?
Yeah, so AI represents a huge shift. Long term, it decreases margins on the cost and profit ratio of creating content. And that's just a reality. It doesn't bring it to zero, but 3 years from now, it's going to be publishers competing for a smaller piece of the pie. I don't think there's any way around that. And I don't think we can ignore what Google is trying to reward with these helpful content updates. And that is brands, real people, authentic experiences. And as shaky as their initial rollouts have been, I think that's going to be where all platforms go eventually. Brands, real people, real experiences, products that people search for, and commodity content, just producing content, the margins are going to be so low that fewer and fewer people are going to be doing that. So lean into yourself, lean into what you can authentically offer the world. And that's going to be one path through this maze that we're about to enter.
Well, Cyrus, I thought it would be apropos to make sure to pop over to Google and search for the Toaster Guy and see what came up. The number one result, the Instagram handle @TheToasterGuy. Hasn't shared since 2018, so it might be a great opportunity for someone.
And that's a horrible result. Come on, rank his website, Google.
I didn't have pages and pages to scan through to find the poor guy's result, but I will just share that there
Google,
is a toaster
what are you doing to the Toaster Guy?
There is a Toaster Guy. There is a Toaster Guy. Hasn't been active in a while. Cyrus, where can people follow along with what you're doing? I'll just shameless plug. I love to follow you on X. You're can't miss follow for the stuff you share. I don't say that to everyone, but I mean, we talk about your work on the news portion of the podcast very frequently. So that's definitely a great place. Where else can people follow along with what you have going or reach out if they have any questions?
Definitely LinkedIn is more of my sharing, as many people today are. But I'm everywhere but Facebook, and Facebook is just for my mom, which is kind of a weird American thing. I deal with a lot of, European and world, and they use Facebook for business, and me, it's just like, I just sharing pictures of my garden on Facebook. But yeah, hey, hook up with me there too.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll get you a few more friends other than just your mom. So, hey, Cyrus, this has been wonderful again. Let's not make it a couple years for the next time. Thank you again for coming on. I think that this question of what is helpful content has been on everyone's mind, and it gets touched on, I feel like, almost every single time we have an interview, but it hasn't been the sole focus of an interview. So you did a great job tackling it. Thanks for a great time.
Hey, some of the best questions I've got. Thank you, Jared. Always a pleasure to be here.
My pleasure. We'll talk again soon, Cyrus.
See ya.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to the Niche Pursuits podcast. I just wanted to remind you that if you are ready to start building smarter, faster, and easier internal links, you should check out Link Whisper. You can get $15 off Link Whisper when you use the coupon code PODCAST at checkout. Head over to linkwhisper.com and use the code PODCAST in order to save $15. Thanks again for listening.